In 2018, the movie Love, Simon, produced by 20th Fox Century, was released. It received great acclaim from the critics, and it's considered the first film by a major Hollywood studio to focus on gay teenage romance. We might be in the 21st century, and even if homosexuality is openly talked about in movies and TV shows, it wasn't always the case. There's a whole history behind it, and today I'll show you how the history of the LGBT community has had an influence on the representation of the community as a whole. Let's go back in time a little to 1895 with the first ever recorded gay movie. This black and white movie runs for 17 seconds and was the first known film with live recorded sound. Some people say this is the first depiction of a same-sex relationship on screen. However, during that time, men dancing together wasn't necessarily something remarkable, and since that movie was an experiment, nothing can confirm that they were indeed homosexual. If we go now to 1927 with the film Wings, a silent film set during World War I, it featured a gay kiss and no one really made a big deal of it. It even became the first winning Best Picture at the Academy Awards in 1928. Surprising, is it? Well, during that era, homosexuality wasn't necessarily talked about. It remained very taboo. It wasn't seen as bad, but it wasn't necessarily praised either. It didn't bother anyone as long as one maintained one's proper gender role. At that time, being homosexual and transgender were considered the same thing. This defined the stereotypes that gay men are effeminate and lesbians are mannish. Men were portrayed as sissy, and women wore tuxedos and had slick back hair like men. Then the Great Depression hit, and theaters were desperate to get people to watch movies. They decided to shock the audience with violence, nudity, and homosexuality. Of course, the Catholic Church was not happy about this. They decided to boycott these kinds of films. This led to the creation of the Hays Code, or the Production Code, which stipulated, among other things, that sex perversion or any inference to it is forbidden on screen. This included any kind of homosexual depiction. Back then, homosexuality on screen was already rare, and after the application of this ban, it was completely inexistent. During the 1940s, the hunt against homosexuality in the United States got worse. Nonetheless, gay men and lesbians contributed incredibly to World War II by engaging in volunteering. Despite this, in 1942, the military, along with psychiatrists, developed guidelines for recruiters to identify and exclude gay men from enrolling. With the production code in place, the easiest and more convenient way to get a homosexuality in your movie was by portraying them as a villain. And of course, the homosexual had to die by the end of the movie. In 1968, the Supreme Court of the United States tore the Hays Code apart. This was good news for the production studios. It gave them more freedom, and they weren't as afraid of the church's boycott. However, this didn't increase the representation. It gave instead another image to Hollywood, the self-hating, suicidal homosexual. This kind of representation had a direct impact on the way that people perceived LGBT people at the time. In those films, people were told so often that they were wrong that the characters began to hate themselves.
Oh, I feel so damn sick and dirty, I can't stand it anymore!
To the point where even the audience believed it. Hollywood has contributed to the discrimination of homosexuals. The perception of LGBT people began to improve in 1973. It was in this year that the American Psychiatric Association declared that homosexuality is not a psychiatric disorder. The disco era also helped to build this image as it introduced the gay culture to the mainstream. After Stonewall, Hollywood realized that they would make more money if they aimed their films to the LGBT community. The 1970s was a great period for depicting homosexual romance in movies. Boys in the Band, for instance, was a revolutionary movie that improved LGBT representation in the media. Other films such as Cabaret and Making Love were huge steps forward into a better image of homosexuals on screen. And in 1979, over 100,000 people took part in the first march in Washington, D.C. for lesbian and gay rights. With the arrival of the AIDS epidemic, church boycotts made a comeback. This particularly affected the gay community since this virus was first identified in homosexual men and was previously called gay-related immune deficiency. This tarnished the image that the community had been building for years. It brought them back to being represented as villains in the mainstream media. In the 1990s, queer cinema began to change as low-budget movies portrayed different images of being queer. These characters are more fluid and considered sexual identity as a changing movement. Films such as My Own Private Idaho, Born in Flames, and Mala Noche demonstrated such portrayal. As soon as Hollywood smelled the money, they jumped in and began doing more dignified movies. Despite this, the characters were often comic and based on stereotypes. An exception to this is Philadelphia, that came out in 1993 and explored the struggle of living with AIDS. Slowly, homosexuality on screen stopped being something to laugh at, or pity, or even fear. In 2005, Brokeback Mountain made a huge impact in the way homosexuals were portrayed in mainstream media. It presented two well-developed characters with the background and explored intimacy, which was a first for Hollywood movies. This is an important turn in the history of LGBT representation in the media. As years passed, this depiction gained momentum. Characters from the community could be seen here and there in movies and TV shows, although these often followed the defamatory stereotypes of the past, but it was better than nothing. Nowadays, having a gay or lesbian character is the norm. It's as necessary as having a black or Asian character. It's all a question of diversity and proper representation of every minority. But it's also because of the freedom and action that LGBT people take every day to fight for their rights. A historical day to remember for Americans is June 26, 2015, the day the U.S. Supreme Court legalized gay marriage in all 50 states. Production studios, for instance, craft their characters more diligently and try not to base them off stereotypes. It happens, but we are making more progress than ever. Movies like Moonlight, for instance, released in 2016, focus on the struggle of being homosexual and black in a non-supporting environment. It became the first LGBT-themed movie to ever win an Oscar. This is the kind of representation that was needed and demanded for so long. The community just wanted for the stories to be told the right way, because nobody wants to feel alone. Many people struggle with their sexual identity, and seeing it normalized as often as possible allows them to feel some sort of relief. It gives them hope that they too can live openly. And it is important. Representation matters. Proper representation matters. The way we represent each other in the media is the way we perceive each other in real life. This is the history that has shaped the way LGBT people are portrayed today in the mainstream media. These struggles have allowed them to thrive and be accepted for who they are in society. It wasn't always easy. It was often 2 steps forward and then 2 steps back. However, in the end, the decades-long battle for better representation has borne its fruit, but it's far from being over.